This is Rough Drafts Welcome,
the podcast where you can mess up, and we can too.
I'm Sachiko.
And I'm Erin.
And together with the editors at Salt and Sage Books,
we're changing the face of storytelling, one rough draft at a time.
We're glad you're here. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Rough Drafts Welcome. We are so excited to sit down and chat with you today. Sachiko, how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm nervous because we're going to, hey, Rough Drafts Welcome. It's all about being vulnerable. Here's a rough draft part of my little writer heart. We're going to talk about strengths and weaknesses and what we can do about a specific kind of writing struggle. And this is something I struggle with, so I'm really excited to talk to you, Erin, and pick your brain and let everybody enjoy how good you are at this and what your ideas are.
Well, thank you so much.
Can you explain what the idea is?
Okay.
And then I'll talk.
I came up with this idea during a NaNoWriMo the year after my daughter was born. So it was mid 2010s, and I had literally had a baby like 2 weeks before NaNoWriMo started. And like the person I am, I guess, I was like, of course I'm still going to do NaNoWriMo. Of course I'm going to come to all of the events 2 weeks postpartum. It'll be fine. I don't know what I was thinking. I mean, I do. I do know what I was thinking because writing keeps me sane and keeps me grounded and helps me feel like a whole person. So even though I was like, I'm not going to miss Nano, especially not at this particular point in my life where I was feeling very like untethered from my sense of self. So this is not to say that if you are pregnant or have a child that you should not take a break from writing. This is simply what ended up happening for me. And I actually didn't end up, quote unquote, winning NaNoWriMo that year because I went to 2 or 3 meetings and then I was like, hi, I'm exhausted. I'm going to go home and I'm going to sleep now.
It's okay to revise plans, guys. It's okay.
So, but in the beginning, I had this idea about a particular book that I wanted to write, and I knew what I wanted it to feel like, but I didn't necessarily, and this is where you see I am such a pantser. And this was before I had refined my process a little bit more. It's about, I guess it's like almost 10 years ago now. That's weird to think about, but I knew what I wanted the book to feel like, but I didn't necessarily have a plot. I didn't necessarily have characters. I didn't necessarily know what I was doing. All I knew is like I had this really vague idea and I had sort of 2 characters who like sort of existed. And I knew there was going to be kissing at some point, and I knew what I wanted it to feel like. And so I found another book that was this, like, gave me the same feeling. And I was like, I'm just so curious, like, how did this author create this feeling out of this book? So I went through and like deep read the book again, and I marked particular points like, okay, this is where this plot section happens. This is where this plot section happens. Oh, this is definitely the midpoint. This is definitely like the all is lost, dark night of the soul. This is, oh, yep, and here's the climax. So I marked so many different things in this book and really just like deep read it and tried to understand like, ooh, how did she do that? Okay, I'm feeling some sort of way. Why do I feel that way? Is it like this certain turn of phrase? Is it the way that she's packed this character up? And being able to read it like that, like with some distance, made me be like, oh, this is interesting.
So you call this, what you were doing with this analysis using this author's book as a text, what do you call this sort of approach?
Deep reading? I don't know. I've heard other people call it like you're designing your own MFA program.
Oh, okay.
Like, really, as soon as you sit down and you're like, I want to understand why this book is as effective as it is, and you're trying to look at it from a reading point of view, or excuse me, from a writing point of view. I think we all get to this point as authors that the more that you read, the more that you're like, oh, I see what you did there. I see what you did there. Like sometimes to the point that it gets hard to actually just read for fun because you're analyzing everything.
You're not enjoying the ride because you just want to look under the hood.
Exactly. Like, ooh, this is fun. But like, ooh, I wonder how they did. Oh, look at that strange use of aphorism. Like, okay, we can become problems to our own self-enjoyment. So then what I ended up doing with this particular book is I was like, I still don't know the plot of my own story well enough, but I know like vaguely what it is. So what I ended up doing is I genuinely copied a first chapter. It was the first chapter of this particular book, and I wasn't intending to do anything with it. I am not advocating for plagiarism, okay? Plagiarism and I are sworn enemies. Do not plagiarize. Don't do it. But what I ended up doing is that I typed up the whole first chapter, and then I had it opened in one window. And then I had my story that I was literally beginning that night, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to copy her structure, and I'm just going to see what it feels like. And again, I didn't really have a super clear idea of like what the story was going to be. And like, it was at that point in my life that I was like, I just close my eyes and I just like let the muse flow through me. And that's great. I wrote books that way. But so what I ended up doing is I literally would say, all right, there are 4 sentences in this first,
Right.
like in this first paragraph. And she starts with talking about the landscape. All right. And this sentence is 10 words long and has this many adjectives. Now I am going to write mine as close as I can manage it. I'm not copying what she's doing, but I am copying her structure to the T as much as I could. And I did, I think, 3 pages of that. And it was hard on my brain to try to like make it fit. Like if you've ever tried to write a particular type of poetry, where you're like, I know what it is I want to say, but like I need to fit it into this specific rhyming structure.
Why do you think it was hard? Was it because it wasn't coming from within?
Well, so much of the way that I was writing at that point was just really free and loose. And like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like the muses are speaking through me. Ba 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 ba, here I go. And so it was very unstructured. And so I was trying to force my brain into a structure. Like, okay, I can see what you want to say next, but like, how can we say it in a way that it's going to fit into this precise thing? Like, okay, you want to include this particular detail, but her paragraph is done. So do you want to go back and swap it out for another detail that feels more or less important? And it was like, so I wrote 2 pages like that before I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so like, my brain is so exhausted from trying to like make these things fit in so precisely. But I learned such an enormous amount in doing that. And I actually started every single one of my sessions for writing that particular book. I started by reading the next chapter of the actual, like the published book. I'd be like, okay, really? What does she do next?
So how much did you use it as an assist?
Yeah.
Through every single chapter?
I used it as an outline. Well, and especially when I would get stuck, because I got probably 50% of the way through and I was like, this is great. I know what I'm doing. Blah, blah, blah. Words are flowing. But then I'd get to like 60% and I'd be like, ooh, I don't actually.
Right, now what?
I don't remember. And so then I'd be like, okay, I know I just finished the midpoint. So I'd go back to the book where I had marked the midpoint and I'd go and I'd read and I'd be like, oh, okay. This is what she does next. This is how she works it in. We're pulling back from this particular main story, and this is where like the B story. Oh, okay, I see what she's doing.
So I just want to stop for a second and let everybody know, because I'm going to have you pick this back up. Because what I want all of you listening to know is that Erin is superb at. Okay, it's not just that you're really good at coming up with ideas and then writing them. You finish your projects. And then you track the metrics. She is amazing with an Excel spreadsheet, everyone. And then she uses those metrics to keep refining her process. And so that's what fascinates me about this and why I wanted to ask you and pick your brain about this is because you use this. How did this impact the process in that finishing that project and in your next project?
Oh, good question. So for this particular project, I was really surprised. Both how often I went back to like the book that I was quote unquote tracing, and I'm calling it tracing on purpose. I was not copying the book, but I was looking at it to understand the structure. And then occasionally I look at it and be like, well, hang on, like she did a really beautiful kissing scene. And at that point I had never written a kissing scene. And so I went back and I reread her kissing scene like probably 20 times where I was like, why is this so effective? how does she describe the kissing? Why does this work? Like, what details does she include? Why is this so good? And then to be able to understand those things. So it was surprising how many times I went back to it, because I didn't realize how often I would kind of get in my own head about my ability to do a thing. I'd be like, oh, well, I've never written a kissing scene before, so I don't know how to do that. But when I had something, I'd be like, well, I'll just go look it up. It's not that big of a deal. I'll just go look it up. And I'll try her way of doing it. And if that works, amazing, I'll keep it. And if it doesn't work, I have other books that have kissing scenes in them. I can just go find another one. If this
Which
one
is
doesn't work.
great. I love this idea.
It's
of being able to use it as a boost.
You know, when you cook, like when you have a recipe, especially when you're trying a recipe out for the very first time, you try one form of recipe and you're like, okay, that worked okay, but like, I don't love the way this came out. Let me find a different recipe that doesn't use quite so much coriander. You go and you find coriander's a great spice. Just too much of it can be too much. And so then you go and you find one that has a slightly different spice ratio, or they use whole wheat flour instead of the bleached white flour. And that and you go through different iterations of it until you get to the one that you're like, oh yeah, this is the right recipe. They are all recipes for whatever. They're all like pasta recipes, or it's all bread recipes, but you have to find like the one that works for you. And the only way you can do that is through experimentation. And for me, I felt like I could try to reinvent the wheel, but I've read so many good kissing scenes that have made my heart go pitter patter that why don't I just try her recipe?
Right.
That seems fine. Why don't I just try her recipe?
So I'm sorry. Go on.
Go.
Well, I'm almost wanting to, first, I'm curious what our listeners think. Like, if you have published works, how do you feel about people using your published works as a reference for how to write what they want to write because they admire it so much? I think, opinions could be all over the place. I think I'd be flattered. Yeah. And because it's Rough Drafts Welcome, I also want to say I love this idea because my specific weakness is definitely just drafting, that mid-level stage of writing. And so I'm wondering if people, how do you know that this is the next thing for you to try? Like, what is it that you're going to be struggling with? What are we struggling with where this could be a great next thing that could be the thing that gets us over the hump?
Well, I want to speak to the idea of you taking inspiration from someone else's book. I think that we all do that very naturally. And I think where you do need to be careful that, don't plagiarize other people's work. Maybe we should define plagiarism real quick. Plagiarism is when you take anything that was created by another person and you wholesale take it and you do not give them credit. You do not give them credit. So if you are just saying, oh, well, I love this plot idea, I'm just gonna whoop and just drop it wholesale into mine, that's not okay. That's not okay. Even if you change the characters' names and you just redo a famous book, but with different character names, that's not it. That is not it. That's plagiarism. But if you can be inspired by, that's a completely different vibe. And for me, the whole point of doing this sort of tracing process was not so that I could just skip the hard work of figuring out why it worked. I was looking really closely at the pieces and saying, I don't understand why this works. I want to figure out how it works. And the only way that I know how to do that is to write it out and then try to copy it as exactly as I can with my own words. Again, I am not taking a paragraph from their book and pasting it directly into mine. I am saying, okay, this first sentence focuses on the scenery. Okay, so we're just gonna see what it feels like. Okay, I'm focusing on the scenery. Okay, next, we're zoomed in a little. Okay, I'm zooming in a little bit more. Okay, and then the next segment is when we introduce the character, but she's interacting with the scenery in a way that is going to be meaningful later. Okay. How can I do that? All right, here's how she can interact with the scenery in a way that maybe is going to be meaningful later because I'm pantsing and I don't know. Okay, and then the next paragraph is she notices something specific, and then that leads into her having a conversation with the person she's with. Okay, so, and then here's the conversation.
And here's what I'm hearing, and this is why it helped me. First, you know that quote by Ira Glass, that really famous quote about how we're really self-critical when we're first starting out.
Yeah.
Because we're much higher level arts consumers than we are producers.
Yeah.
And so I noticed I needed to do something like this when I didn't understand pacing, and I was getting so impatient with myself and with what I felt like was a lack of productivity. When it was just that I was familiar with the pacing of a book as a reader, but not the pacing of a book as a writer. And I've read this approach in some writing instruction books before that were published a couple decades ago, where they said, if you want to learn pacing, take a book where you like the pacing and it was a good read, and copy the entire thing longhand. And so when I had babies and they were in the gym daycare and I'd worked out and I'm sweaty and gross, I was sitting in the lobby and just copying. Right? I know. The best writing time, sometimes when I sit down, I just expect my scalp to be greasy, because I did so much writing using my 2 hours a day of gym daycare. I'd get my workout in and then go and write. I was trying to learn more about fast-paced paranormal romance. And so I was copying a Patricia Briggs book. And just the things that it taught me about structure, just having to copy it longhand. It was amazing. And the really great part about it is there's a lot of, especially for our neurodivergent people out there, if you're tired and busy, there's a level of learning in it that you don't even have to be very conscious of when you're doing it. If you just show up and do it, you're going to get a kinesthetic sense of what pacing looks like, of what descriptions work like, of how the story works.
I think all the time about this story that a high school art teacher had his students do, split the group in half or something, split the class in half, and half of the students were required to make as many pieces of art as they could, and the other half was required to only submit one piece at the end. And then that was their whole grade. Both of them were weighed equally. And what they found was that the students who threw stuff at the wall, the quantity group made higher quality stuff than the quality group. And there is so much beauty in that, I think, that we have this ability as humans to, when we just throw stuff at the wall, I think we tap into something inside of us that is oh, well, this just isn't really a big deal. Okay, yeah, I write books, whatever, look at that, I wrote another one. Okay, look at that, I wrote another one. And that's kind of what my whole approach to writing is built off of, is this idea that if I just write, if I just keep going, and I don't let myself get stuck, because in the beginning, I mean, we could talk about this, I got really seriously stuck. And that was a really hard mental space for me to be.
Yeah.
And, we could talk about
it's
that.
Super frustrating. It's super, and it feels like you're not even getting to be yourself. It doesn't feel like freedom. It doesn't feel like sovereignty. It doesn't feel like joy. It's very, very hard. Especially, and if that stuckness is based in life circumstances or something else, it still doesn't make it any less difficult to live with, work with.
Yeah, but that feeling of feeling stuck is horrible. And that for me destroyed my desire to write more than anything else, is this feeling of I have to do it perfectly. Because this is my one chance, versus saying no, I have unlimited chances. For as long as I am alive, I'm going to be telling stories, writing stories, dictating stories. I am a story person. And then to be okay with that feels so much more expansive.
So using a cooking metaphor, to me, this sounds like if you know you need to make a multi-course meal, which is an entire novel, why make everything from scratch when you can use Hamburger Helper? Just get the meal done, come back, and then you can remake portions of the meal.
Yeah. Well, and,
in a higher level way.
When you go to a great big, a family reunion, or you go to a bunch of friends together, anywhere where there is a buffet and everyone has brought their best pieces to share. And that, I try to think of it as I am surrounded by all of these books that are amazing, and these authors who I admire so deeply. And they each have their own particular thing that is their own like magical zing. And I'm not trying to take it from them, but
Right.
I am trying to be like, oh my gosh, this is the best pot roast I've ever had in my life. Can I please have your recipe? And sometimes they say no, and that's okay. And this is where the metaphor, I guess, starts to fall apart, because I don't know that I've never like emailed an author and been like, hey, would you mind if I used your book to like help me learn better how to write whatever? I've never done that. But to me, it feels like writing and reading, they go hand in hand so beautifully, because as you deep read, you understand so much more about what makes you tick as a reader. And then once you understand, like, ooh, that hits me so good as a reader, then it's easier for you to say, okay, this is a thing that I'm then going to bring to the table for myself. Well, I'm like, okay, people might hate this idea of tracing, and that's totally fine. You don't have to do that. I found it incredibly helpful. And when I get stuck, I still go back and use it.
So you're still using this as a tool?
Absolutely. I feel like I just keep bringing up the kissing metaphor, but I wrote a book. I sent it out to my beta readers, and they were like, oh, honey, this needs so much more romance in it. And I was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. If you've been tuned into this whole season at all, you know that I have feelings about romance. For a lot of reasons, romance has been a really difficult genre for me. We don't need to get into all of that again. You can go back and re-listen to other podcasts that we've recorded in the past where I'm talking about romance. But I really wanted to figure it out. I was like, okay, I know it's hard for me. It's not even that I don't like it. It just feels hard. So why does it feel hard? What is it about it that feels hard about it? Da, 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 da. And so my sweet beta readers were like, okay, listen. My one reader in particular, she was like, I need you to add at least 2 more kissing scenes. That would help. At least 2 more.
That's a nice
expected a kissing scene kind of here-ish. And then you gave me one in the middle, but like I was expecting another one at the end. Girl, like where did that kissing scene? You promised me and then you did not deliver. And I was like, oh, this is because I don't
okay.
like those.
Wait. So question.
Yeah.
Are you saying that, I mean, were you missing the kissing scenes because they weren't in the book that you were using? Or
No.
you would have more kissing?
I was just writing this book out of my brain. So I have stopped reusing books in whole. I don't do that anymore so much, unless I am like truly stuck. So I use it as a way now to get myself unstuck, because when I got that feedback, I was like, okay, she's right. I do need more kissing scenes, and it would make sense. And then when I went back and looked at my outline, it was like kissing scene. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Like I planned them. I just didn't put them in because the romance it's just a hard plot line for my brain to wrap itself around. I am working on it, and I feel like I understand it so much better. But this is probably 2 years ago where I was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. I have to add more kissing scenes. And so I went back to those sections. I looked at them, and I remember just sitting in front of my computer like this, like, I don't know how to do this. How am I supposed to add a kissing scene? I don't want to do it, but I don't want to do it because I don't know how. I don't feel like I have that like easy access in my brain. Like I couldn't find a way to get in. So I went downstairs to my great big library, and I was like, all right, what are my books that have the best kissing scenes? And I pulled out 5 or 6 of them, and I was like, okay, brought them up to my office, and I read through until I found the kissing scenes. And then so I had like book after book after book after book after book just like laid out on my desk, and I was like, all right, how do they do this? What is effective? What do I not like? Because I'm not going to write a kissing scene as a writer that would make me as a reader go, ugh, because I have those moments. I'm a little bit precious, guys. It's okay. But I found threads in all of them that I was like, oh, okay. I really like these kissing scenes because they are based so intensely on the feelings of the people. It's not so much like what is happening as they are kissing. It's not like the literal description of like mouths touching, which I'll be honest, from a sensory perspective, is kind of gross. It's like slimy, and sometimes people have bad breath, and like that doesn't mean you don't want to be kissing them, but like I don't want to write down and his bad breath, blah 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 blah. Like no. So
is this maybe why you're not enjoying writing romance as much?
Possible. It really is a sensory thing for me. Like I
Hmm.
have, and my husband will tell you if he kisses me and his breath tastes like coffee or it smells like,
Now I'm curious which genre comes really easily for you then.
a struggle. All of them and none of them.
Hmm.
All of them and none of them. That's a good question. I honestly have a really hard time categorizing myself as far as genre goes. You'll be so shocked to hear.
So you were using the books as references in order to access all of those like genre expectations?
Yeah, well, and like to understand how did they do this in a way that was so effective? Because when I read this book and I got to the kissing scene, I was not like, oh, okay, kissing scene, which sometimes I feel that way about. When I got to the kissing scenes in these books, I was like, oh my gosh, they're kissing, yay! Like how I wanted that to be the feeling.
Oh, right? You wanted an emotional payoff.
Yes. And so being able to understand like, okay, this is the way that they describe it. So like in one of the books, I remember distinctly being like, she talks a lot about the way that the look in his eyes changes when she notices him leaning in to kiss her. Like his eyes like soften. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. Because then I was like, I suddenly understand. It's because he is showing her the vulnerability of like coming close. And I was like, that is what I like.
Oh,
that is what it is. It's this vulnerable, like, oh, I like you could hurt me and I'm willing to let you. Like I'm
so
going to open up and be vulnerable.
You used your reading to see what worked for you so that you could better replicate it.
Yes, and then I was able to put in those. I didn't actually end up tracing any of those things, but it was like, what is it that I find, like what really works for me in a kissing scene? And what really does not work for me in a kissing scene. And then once I was able to identify, okay, in these books, the thing that really works well for me is when I see that each of the people is being vulnerable. They're approaching this moment in a state of emotional vulnerability. That for me is what makes me be like, oh, I love them so much. And then if their kiss gets interrupted, even better. But like, I didn't know that before.
I've heard really similar advice in all genre expectations. Like if you want to know how to write an action scene, you need to go read action scenes and try to replicate the blocking. Or if you want to know the pacing for an action novel, like flip through the pages and see how much white space there is because it's just a page turner and replicate that as much as possible. So if somebody is trying to write to market, how would you recommend they use tracing as a tool for them to be able to get producing, especially if they're stuck, if they genuinely want to have written, they want to be productive, they want to even just create that crappy first draft, but they're still stuck. So now what?
It depends so much on what you are already naturally good at. So that is honestly the very first thing that I would do is I would maybe ask friends because it's hard for us to decide on our own what we're really good at. I would identify first and foremost, what are the things that I'm really naturally talented at? And I can promise you that if you are interested in writing, you have something that you are naturally talented at. You do. It is there. You might not know what it is yet. You may not have found it, but I can guarantee with 100% cashback accuracy, whatever. I promise you that you have something that you are naturally so good at. There is something that brought you to writing because there are millions of people who are readers who have no desire to write. There are millions of people who never once in their lives have thought, ooh, I want to write my own book. There are so many people who only want to read. So then the fact that you want to write means there is something in you that is naturally drawn towards it, which in my mind means that you are naturally very talented at something within the writing sphere. You just are.
So is it just a matter of trying different things out and being tolerant of failure or what we perceive as failure?
Isn't that just like the best advice ever? Just keep trying. But
But here's an idea, though. Here's an idea. Because if we were going to be giving advice to somebody, like say a client came to us and was like, can you just help me over this hump? I just want a consultation. What if, here's just an idea, we told them we'll get a these are the top books in these genres. Read them and try replicating, write the first chapter and see how it felt to copy the first chapter.
It's been really interesting to me to try to, like, I've given this advice to people more than once, been like, yeah, just see, like, what do you notice about the first chapter even? Read it really closely and then try to replicate it as much as you can with your own story. And it's so interesting to do it as like a revision process. Like, okay, I've already written my story. I'm now going to take this book and I'm going to use my words, but then like, I'm just editing it to sound a little bit more like this particular author's style. And then I find that as soon as people do that, they get about anywhere from 500 to 1,000 words in, and they're like, oh my gosh, I know what I need to do. I don't understand why it works. I don't understand. But I can tell you that, like, the process of, like, I almost think of it like a meat grinder. You're just like with your story and you're trying to put it out into a different form. Something about that makes you think about the way that you write in a different way. And because you are having to do it in a way that is so structured, and maybe this only works for pantsers, I don't know, but doing it in a way that is so structured and so precise and so rigid, all of a sudden makes your brain be like, wait, I know the answer to this other thing that I've been worried about this entire time. I don't understand why it works, but it does for some reason.
I think for me, I have so much fear wrapped in, am I going to be able to draft this? Am I going to produce that 1,000 words today? That if I take away that worry, all of a sudden my brain's like, actually, now that I'm not worrying, my hands are free, I'm kind of bored. Like, can I just work on being creative and enjoying this?
Yeah.
So, and I love the idea because I've noticed this. We were just talking about this. The levels where it's not even necessarily conscious, but the levels on which we will take things in, make decisions, and change, even when we're not consciously deciding any of it. We're noticing that there's something about, people talk about sleeping on a problem and then waking up with a solution, or just going and taking a walk. And I love the idea that you can just take something and start copying it, and something within the brain is like, oh, I get it now. I get it.
Yeah. Like, I mean,
It's like how, but I do.
We are, as humans, we are built to tell story. I think we underestimate maybe how much we have been absorbing it on a subconscious level. So however you can let your subconscious free to play around, like, do that. I want to go back to your question about we wanted someone, if they said, okay, I'm here, I'm writing to market. What do I do? First thing I would do is say, get really clear about what you are naturally good at, because that is going to inform the sort of story that you write. So, like, for example, you, Sachiko, are incredibly good naturally. I'm so jealous of it at world building. Like, we've talked about this. I don't understand how your brain just like has room for all of that connected information. It blows my mind how much you're like, oh, well, yeah, because of this and this and this. And I'm like, excuse me? What? I forgot to even think about gravity. And you're over here like, oh, yes, this particular type of gravity and subgravity. Like, you just have it in your brain. It is a pre-built structure that you can hang whatever you want on, and it is magical. So you know that any fiction you are going to write is probably going to have a naturally really engaging world. So then whatever you then put into that world, I think that is where then you're like, okay, I'm going to lean into, like, I already know I can write a really good world. So what are the genres that I feel comfortable writing that have really good worlds in them, and where the readers are coming looking for a really good world? They're looking for a good world. They're hungry for a good world, because you can give them that. The rest of your plot could be absolute trash. And the world you have created is still going to be engaging because you are naturally very good at world. I have a friend who is so talented at prose. Like, back up, honey. She writes something and I'm like, where did you even come up with these gorgeous words? Like, they are so beautiful. The way that she describes things is so just, But she, like, if she were writing to market, I would say you find a genre where the readers are coming hungry for like beautiful words. Anything else you do,
yeah.
you can learn and improve all those other things. But if you are naturally very good at something, and I promise you that you have it somewhere, you might not know what it is, but you have it, then everything else that you hang up against the backdrop of the thing you are good at, the thing you are good at is still going to shine through. And you might learn to be better at characterization. You might learn how to write kissing scenes. This is hilarious, honestly, because people are going to listen to this and they're going to look at the book that I'm like, that I have on sub right now. Or no, the book that I'm, not the one I have on sub, the one that I'm writing right now that is full of kissing scenes. And they're going to be like, oh, Erin, didn't you just talk about like how much you don't love kissing? Listen, my whole point in saying that I didn't like kissing scenes is that I learned what made them work for me. And now I can write them because I had to figure out what made them work.
You know what?
Well, go.
But what you said just made me remember something, because I love how you're saying what you've got to match what you are naturally good at, what you love to make, with what people are hungry for. Because if they're coming to that genre with expectations, you know, people reading romance are hungry for the kissing scenes. People reading speculative fiction, they are there for a really cool, immersive world, right? Mm-hmm. And I just read this amazing thought from someone in a writing group. I don't have their name right now. I can't attribute them. I want to. And so I'll try to do that for the show notes. Where they said that you need to figure out what your audience wants, and that this is customer service. Like, give them what they're hungry for. Find it out and then give it to them. And I love the idea of finding, okay, what are the things that have worked for other people? Like, what are they looking for? This person has met that need admirably. I want to meet that need. How can I meet that need? And for me, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's my time being a caretaker in my life, but for some reason, my brain feels a little more open towards how can I do something good for people and meet their expectations. Maybe it's people pleasing on a meta level, whatever. If it works, it's fine, because that pleases me ultimately to be productive, versus just how can I meet my own productivity needs. They're both great, like whatever your goals are out there, everybody out there. But I personally, I'm just seeing that connection. I'm loving that.
That makes me happy. I think they always say that if you want to break into a subgenre, and we're talking specifically indie publishing here, where you have the ability to really pivot and write quickly and release quickly. It's a different thing if we're talking traditional publication. But if you are looking at indie and you really want to write to market, they say the best research that you can do is you read the top 10 or top 20 bestsellers in the genre, because so much about indie is understanding like the big genre expectations and then getting as narrow as humanly possible. And to say like, okay, within the romance genre, I'm seeing that a lot of people really love like second chance romances. And within that second chance romance, what people are really, really, really liking is the sunshine and the, what do they call it? Sunshine and grumpy?
Grumpy, yeah.
Like the sunshine grumpy trope, right? Like,
right.
And then that is what you can say like, all right, I write really good romance, just generally speaking. And then sure, I could write like a second chance romance. That gives me ideas. I'm interested in that. And then how can I also incorporate this grumpy sunshine
dynamic?
You know, then that's like, okay, well, I already know I'm good at this. So then this is just me trying one particular thing and like, okay, does that hit for my audience? Cool, great. I'll write another one. And then you just keep writing them until they don't hit anymore. And then you go back to the research stage and you're like, all right, so my audience has shifted away from, okay, they still like second chance romance, but now they're more interested in like, I can't think of another trope, like a cinnamon roll man trope.
Oh yes, we have to protect.
We just want
and the boss babe woman or whatever.
Yeah, right. So okay, so right, cool. For this next one, I'm gonna do it's still second chance romance, but like now we're playing with the cinnamon roll and the boss babe trope.
You get granular.
Yeah, and the more that really is what makes indie romance work really well. And this is what, in my understanding anyway, really lets indie authors who are like turning it out and they're publishing like a book a month. This is how they're doing it, is that you understand. So like for you, you're so good at world building. You do. I mean, if you were doing like an urban fantasy, then you could say, okay, I already know that I can nail this genre because of the way that I am naturally really good at world building. And I like that whole contemporary, like gritty urban twist, say. I'm making things up. I don't know if that's actually how you feel. But, and then, all right, so within that, what's really popular? Okay, vampires are super popular. Do I feel good about writing a vampire? Sure, I could write a vampire. I don't have anything against vampires. Sounds great. But like, if you didn't like vampires, that's not the subgenre you're going to move into. You're going to be like, vampires aren't really it for me. But you know what I do really love is wolf shifters. We can go there. And so I think you start with what you're naturally good at and you understand what genre that's in. And then you just find that you narrow yourself down and say, I could write that. Yeah, that sounds easy. And for me, if it sounds easy, you're going to do it.
Right. Lower the barrier. I think that's what I'm hearing here is that it's a really great way to create access for ourselves. Even if we don't know why we're stuck, it's something that we can still use. And what I'm also hearing here, especially as we're talking about romance, what I see in common with all of romance is that it's a very, very rigid structure. Like we already know you've got to have the HEA. You already know you have to have a certain proportion of kiss scenes. I once was taking a class and they said, look, in every romance novel, if you take a book and you open it to the very middle page, they're going to be kissing.
Yeah.
Like that midpoint kiss is gospel. And so I think that using this tracing on genres that have these very solid structural expectations is such a great way to be able to get ourselves moving in the right direction.
Trace on a chapter level, you can trace on paragraph level, and you can trace on a sentence level. It really depends what you need from the story. If you're having a hard time understanding like the plot structure overall, how it all fits together, look at it from a chapter level. If you're having a harder time understanding how they made this particular like Dark Night of the Soul chapter feel so impactful, go reread that and then trace that on like a paragraph level. And if you're having a hard time with a kissing scene, just go trace that on like a word for word level and it works. Okay, it just does.
So give it a try, everybody. Let us know how it goes for you. Mm-hmm. And let us know some of your favorite works that inspire you.
Yes, please. We love hearing it.
Yep.
Okie doke. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
This has been Rough Drafts Welcome.
Thank you so much for listening.
Got any questions? We would love to hear them. Got a complaint? We'll hear it too.
Yep. Leave us a 5-star review. Pretty please, and thank you. And if you want to book with Salt and Sage Books or learn anything else about what we do, or if you want to work with us or take our courses or blah, 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 you can find us at www.saltandsagebooks.com. And we're all over social media too.
We sure are.
And we'll see you next time.